I've got great pleasure to introduce you to Ian Parminter from the Australian National University, an expert on the Middle East. My goodness me, sir, that would be a hell of a job.
Yes, it moves very quickly, and things can change on a dime, as they say. It's quite an area to watch. I've been watching it since 1976, so it goes back a way.
What was your fascination with it in the first place?
Well, it was almost accidental because I joined the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs, as it was then, in 1976. And they simply asked me, are you interested in language training, in learning a foreign language? And I couldn't see why not. So I just said yes. I didn't say I wanted to learn a particular foreign language. Then at the end of the year, they said, right, we're going to get you to learn Arabic. And they sent me off to Egypt for 2 years to study Arabic, and then go off to several Middle East postings. So with the Foreign Affairs Department, I spent 2 years in Egypt, then 2 years in Saudi Arabia, worked for a while back in Canberra, then had 2 years in Syria at that stage when we had an embassy there, and subsequently 3 years in Russia, and then 3 years in Beirut, in Lebanon, in the late 90s, from 96 to 99. But then when I returned, I worked in the Prime Minister's Department for a little while, but then moved to the Office of National Assessments and oversaw their assessments on Middle East issues. So my career has really been focused on the Middle East, really through that accident back in 1976.
Well, with that experience under your belt, there couldn't be anyone more experienced in Arabic or Islamic affairs than you. I mean, it's
well, there are a few people that I lift my hat to. There are some very good people out there who know the region better than me, can interpret it better than me. No one has a monopoly on knowledge in this part of the world.
Why is it such a volatile part of the world in the first place?
Well, there are so many fault lines right along it. You've got to start with the fault line between the two branches of Islam, between Sunni Islam and Shia Islam. And Shia Islam is predominant in Iran, but also in some Arab states. It's significant. The Shia are actually the dominant religious faith in Bahrain, the island to the east of Saudi Arabia. And in Saudi Arabia, on the eastern side, there are quite a number of Shia who are Saudi, even though the majority faith in Saudi Arabia is Sunni, is Islam. But that's one division. The other, of course, is that in the period of the 20th century, the predominant effect on the Middle East was the foundation of Israel, which created another fault line. It was very much opposed by the Arab states when Israel was initially created or created itself through the War of 1948. And all the Arab states opposed it, but they lost that war, and they lost subsequent wars against Israel in 1956, 1967, and then 73. And after that, Egypt made peace with Israel in 1979, and Egypt was the biggest Arab state, and with Egypt taken out of the hostilities towards Israel, essentially a large-scale war along the lines of 1967 and 1973 could not occur anymore. So it became a different sort of hostility. It became state on state. hostility, but also involved with the growth of a number of smaller actors within states. You take a country like Lebanon, it has 17 religious sects. And initially, it also included quite a number of Palestinians who had been forced there by the Jordanians after the 1967 war. And they were using Lebanon to attack Israel. And in 1982, the Israelis invaded Lebanon to get rid of the Palestinians, and they were successful in doing that. But what happened as a byproduct of that, an accidental, unintended consequence, was the growth of Hezbollah, the Shia militant group, which we now know of, which dominates southern Lebanon. Mm-hmm. It's also an actor in the Lebanese parliament. It has members of parliament, but it was very much helped by Iran, which of course saw Shia in Lebanon as ripe for its assistance, and it continues to do that. It supplies Hezbollah with sophisticated rockets and missiles, and also increasingly drones. So basically, the alliance between Iran and Hezbollah, and to a very large extent between Iran and Syria, which facilitates the movement of weapons into Lebanon, is very important, a very important factor in the region.
It's very complicated, isn't it? And is this background the reason that Egypt and Jordan and possibly even Lebanon won't take the Palestinian refugees?
Well, yes, that's right. I mean, they see the Palestinian issue as an issue that Israel has to resolve. They don't want to be forced to resolve the Palestinian issue themselves. Israel essentially took over a large part of the Palestinian problem, not just through the 1948 war. Look, I might just go back a year. In 1947, and this is probably the most important development just prior to the State of Israel, the United Nations General Assembly published a plan for the division of what was then the British Mandate of Palestine. It was all one country at that stage. And as a result of the Balfour Declaration in 1917, a lot of Jewish people from Eastern Europe, particularly, had been moving into British mandated Palestine, and the British wanted out. It was causing them too much trouble. They were actually insurgent movements among the Jewish population of Palestine, and Menachem Begin, who subsequently became a prime minister of Israel, was involved in that with a group called the Irgun. So the British wanted out. It was also after the Second World War, and decolonization was occurring. So they handed the problem to the UN. The UN divided Palestine into two states. The Israeli, or the Jewish people, they weren't Israeli at that point, accepted it, but the Palestinian residents didn't. They said, well, why should we give up half our land? That was their approach. And then on the 15th of May, 1948, basically the British said, we're out, we're finished, and they left. And then a war broke out. It took several months, but Israel was victorious in that war and was able to establish its own state. And that's why the 15th of May is Israel's National Day. But one often wonders if the Palestinians had accepted the state that was offered in 1947 by the UN General Assembly, if we might have a different situation now, because the Palestinians are now stateless. They do not have a state, but they could have had one at that time. Now, that's all the background to why Egypt and Jordan and the states around Israel, the Arab states, say, well, we're not going to solve the Palestinian problem for you. Israel has to work out an accommodation with the Palestinians. So that's what it's been all about since 1948.
Do you think it's dangerous, as some people, politicians particularly, is it dangerous to have some 3,000 refugees from Palestine? I know they went through the ordinary, normal checks and balances and whatnot, but I can't see how their background could be checked in 12 or 24 hours, or checked thoroughly in that time. Do you think it's dangerous to welcome these people into Australia?
Well, we've taken refugees from all over the world. We had no hesitation in taking Ukrainian refugees. I don't see the Palestinians as being different from them. I mean, clearly, any that can be proven to be members of a terrorist organization, well, yes, they should be rejected. But I don't think a blanket ban on taking Palestinian refugees is actually good for Australia's international humanitarian image. But the other thing is that it's almost irrelevant now in that Palestinians who are in Gaza simply cannot get out. They can't be brought to Australia in any way. So that's we're talking in a sense over in a theoretical issue on a theoretical issue at this stage. Now, at some stage, when the fighting is over, there clearly will be a number of people who will seek refuge in Australia in much the same way as after the Vietnam War in 1975. A number of Vietnamese sought refugees in Australia and subsequently became very good Australian citizens. So I think a blanket ban is not warranted. Clearly, checks are needed, but just about all of the people from the Middle East who want to come to Australia are coming because they're trying to get away from persecution. Yeah. We had no trouble taking Yazidis in northern Syria who were being persecuted by Islamic State. For example, they were just a sect in really sort of in northern Syria and northern Iraq. But we've got a good track record there. I don't see that we need to be particularly concerned about Palestinians as such. They should be given the appropriate checks. But we'll just have to see what actually happens in terms of their future. If the fighting can stop, which has to be the main aim in Gaza at the moment, then that issue can be addressed more thoroughly.
Well, in any case, if they come to a new country, it would be wise to sort of leave the hatred or the baggage behind and have a clean, fresh start, I would think. What did you think of Dennis Richardson, who was formerly the head of ASIO? He was ambassador to America, Australian ambassador to Washington, and I think he was also head of foreign affairs for a while.
He was, yes.
He said he's not particularly worried, and he doesn't think that sympathy for a terrorist organization should get in the way of these people coming to Australia. I found that a very strange sort of statement.
Well, there's a difference between sympathy for the aims, and actually supporting terrorist actions. I mean, the problem is that the situation in the Middle East is now so fraught, and the sorts of images that we're seeing on television every night of what the Americans have described, the Biden administration has described as indiscriminate Israeli bombing of Gaza, which results in a lot of innocent casualties. I mean, we've now got confirmed 40,000 deaths. This is absolutely horrific. But the rule of thumb is that in any war zone, if you if you have a certain number of deaths, you multiply it by 3 to get to those who are really, in a sense, badly incapacitated, but still alive. And that's what we're seeing. I mean, we just saw on television earlier this week pictures of heartrending pictures of Palestinian children who had lost limbs. Their lives are now blighted entirely. So, I mean, the point is that I'm making is that other ordinary people in the street all over the Middle East see these things, and they feel sympathy for the Gazans.
Yes.
That doesn't make them necessarily sort of sympathetic with the aims of Hamas, but they are very sympathetic for the people in Gaza, and trying to draw a distinction between sympathy for the humanitarian plight and sympathy for Hamas is an important and careful decision that needs to be made. But I don't think that just sympathy for the political aims of Hamas in itself, without doing anything about it, should be something that should cause Australians any alarm. But anyway, I mean, this is, as I say, is an issue which can't be really tested at the moment because none of the people in Gaza can get out.
I can't quite understand what the Israelis think they'll achieve because you can defeat an army, I suppose, but you can't defeat an ideology. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, that's the point, and that's a point that the Israeli military spokesman Rear Admiral Hagari, whom we see on television most nights, has said himself. He said it a couple of weeks ago that the war aim of destroying Hamas entirely is impossible to achieve. It is an ideology, and it can't be gotten rid of. I mean, Israel certainly has a very difficult problem. I mean, there can be no minimizing of the horror of the attack of the 7th of October last year. It was a dreadful attack. There were terrible atrocities that occurred, and the question, though, is, and I think Penny Wong has put it this way, Israel obviously has the right to defend itself. No one would take that away. So Israel has the absolute right to defend itself, but the way it defends itself matters. And if that includes indiscriminate bombing of civilian areas, that is something that I think many in the world would actually be concerned with. I mean, all of this has wider implications. It could affect the result of the American elections because a number of Arab Americans live in the state of Michigan, which is one of the key battleground states. They normally vote Democrat, but they're very angry and made this point clear with the Biden administration's basic provision of weapons to Israel. And it's the reality is, and they're aware of it, the Arab Americans are aware of it, that American weapons are actually being used to kill and maim people in Gaza. So they feel very angry. And now they won't vote for Trump, but what they will do, or what the risk that they might do, is just not vote at all, and thereby hand the state to Trump. As in terms of the electoral college counting. So it could affect the result there, and it's very difficult. It's difficult in Australian politics as well because Australians of Middle Eastern origin are in a number of key Labor seats, held by some Labor ministers.
Tony Burke being one, yeah.
Yes, exactly, and they have threatened to vote for a small splinter pro-Arab party. I wouldn't say pro-Islamist necessarily, but pro-Arab party. And if that happens, the vote could be lost. I mean, I think Burke is probably still pretty safe because our preferential system will mean that for the vote to be valid, they'll have to put down preferences, and they'd be unlikely to preference the coalition candidate. But we just have to wait and see. It causes problems for the Labour Party in that way, because Labour is trying to be more even-handed, and that's why it's become a domestic political issue, with the coalition taking a more hard-line approach than Labour towards what's happening in Gaza at the moment.
With those two recent assassinations, the leader of Hamas and Hezbollah, the world has been waiting this week, expecting almost on an hourly basis that there would be some Iranian revenge attack. Nothing's happened. What do you make of that?
It is surprising. I agree. I mean, immediately after the attack in Tehran that killed Ismail Haniyeh, the Hamas representative, this really was a slap in the face for Iran, because Haniyeh was under Iranian protection at that stage. He was a guest in the country, and I think there can be no doubt, even though Israel hasn't admitted that it did it, that it was an Israeli operation. Israel just doesn't admit it to operations that involve use of intelligence. But after that action had occurred, Haniyeh was killed, the supreme leader himself, Khamenei, said there must be an attack that hits Israel directly. Now, that if Iran does not go ahead with that, with an attack on Israel, Iran itself will lose face. But the other thing is that Iran does not want all of this to get completely out of control. It doesn't want a regional war that could end up hurting Iran more than it can take. I mean, there clearly is a lot of opposition to the regime that rules Iran at the moment, as we saw with the demonstrations about women's rights in the past couple of years. But the point is that Iran usually telegraphs any attack that it's going to make on Israel, and it did that in April, after there had been some members of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps assassinated at the Iranian consulate in Damascus, in Syria. But they said, we are going to retaliate, and they did. But Israel was ready with its Iron Dome defense system, and the United States was there too with anti-missile defences, and I think certainly Britain was involved, and quite possibly France was as well. So all of those who were going to support Israel against the attack were there, and the result was that none of the missiles caused any serious damage. There was one person, I think, injured, but there were no deaths within Israel itself. So, I mean, and Iran at that stage said, well, we've retaliated, and that's the end of the matter. So I think Iran will probably want, is probably working out a way to respond in a way that will not necessarily bring major Israeli and American retaliation towards it. And it will be aware that the Americans have moved to carry a battle group into the Gulf, and have moved other naval assets, and also a submarine which can fire guided missiles from beneath the water into the region as well. So the Iranians are aware that there could be some strong retaliation to something that it might do. The other thing I should mention is that I think we can't always assume that Iran will retaliate in the most predictable way. I was just reading an article this morning in The Economist published today about Iran's growing cyber capabilities. And although I'm not forecasting anything, and this article didn't do this either, but Iran's it would be looking to develop a cyber capability that could take out major Israeli infrastructure if it can. Now, the consequence of that would be that, of course, that Israel can do much the same thing back to Iran. So the tit for tat aspect has now got to the stage where both sides have the ability to hurt each other if they want. But the other aspect is whether Iran wants to retaliate through Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Hezbollah is known to have something like 150,000 missiles, rockets and drones. Now, if it unleashed those in large barrages, and we're talking in terms of possibly 3,000 per day, they could overwhelm the Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system. But the other side of that coin is that Iran wants to keep Hezbollah as insurance for its own needs. So if there is a genuine attack on Iran, and particularly on its nuclear facilities, it would want then to call on Hezbollah to attack Israel with all of that capability. But it would rather keep that in reserve for the time being. But cutting across all this is that Israel has admitted that it killed Fuad Shukr, the very senior Hezbollah commander, and Hezbollah feels the need to show some retaliation. So we've got, a point I've always made is that you touch one lever in the Middle East and you can affect something way beyond where you originally meant to affect. And that, of course, was how Hezbollah got created back in 1982. It may never have been created if Israel hadn't invaded Lebanon at that time, and it was very successful in its war aim getting rid of the Palestinians from Lebanon. But it created an even bigger problem for itself with Hezbollah.
And in the meantime, the psychological aspect of just waiting and anticipating or expecting an attack which doesn't come, and every day it probably has you sitting further and further on the edge of your chair. So there's an aspect to just keeping you cool, which could be very effective for Iran.
That's right. I mean, these are mind games, and both sides play it. Actors in the Middle East are very good at that sort of psychological warfare. So we'll just have to see how that develops. But the other aspect is that everyone who lives in the region knows that it's a tough neighborhood, and that they just factor that in. When I was working in Lebanon, the Israeli aircraft would regularly break the sound barrier over Beirut. Initially, it gave you quite a shock to have this huge sonic boom suddenly occur out of nowhere. You wonder if there'd been a bomb explosion somewhere. I recall having an Australian businessman in my office when one of these booms occurred, and this fellow, when I looked around, was on the floor. He really thought that something dreadful was about to happen.
Get under the table. You've given us a lot of your valuable time, sir, and I'm very grateful for that. Let me ask you one last question. Over the years, I've talked to muftis and imams and various experts on the subject of Islam, and I'm told reliably that it is a religion of peace. Then I'm told by other people that if you read the Quran, it is full of violence and war and retribution. And I haven't read it, but would you describe Islam as a peaceful religion, or is it more?
Sorry, you mean Islam? You mean?
Yes, or more warlike than we suspect.
Well, I think Islam in itself, yes, is a peaceful religion that preaches Islam itself means submission to God, and it does preach peace. But by the same token, it doesn't necessarily say that you should turn the other cheek if you're struck. I mean, the Christian Bible, of course, has a lot of instances of violence recorded in it as well, as does the old, both the New and the Old Testament. So the real issue here is trying to resolve the political problem. I mean, it was. I think it was Clausewitz, the German theoretician on war, who said that war is the extension of politics by other means, and that's unfortunately what happens so often in the Middle East. But I wouldn't blame Islam as such for what is happening. I mean, I saw in the civil war in Lebanon that Christians could be just as warlike towards their opponents as people professing either of the two strands of Islam.
But we don't get 17 virgins if we go
so 70, yeah.
Oh, 70, is it?
Yeah.
Dear, oh dear, oh dear. I wonder where that came from.
Well, I don't know, frankly. I don't know. It's I don't want to comment on areas where but I don't know how many Muslims believe that. I must actually ask some of my Muslim friends if they think that's the case.
Yeah.
But I do know that those who die in the cause of Islam are promised special rewards in heaven. But then again, the Crusaders who invaded the Middle East 1,000 years ago thought much the same sort of thing as far as Christianity was concerned.
Religion has a fair bit to answer for over the years.
Yes, I think you're absolutely right.
So, I was just going to say thank you very, very much for talking with us and giving us your wisdom. I'd love to keep your number and get back to you if and when something breaks or something is solved or peace rules or something like that. But it's always going to be a fascinating area for discussion, the Middle East.
It is, yes. I mean, I certainly would love to talk to you if something can be resolved, but I don't think that will necessarily be the topic of any future conversation we might have.
Thank you, Ian, very much.
You're very welcome, Jeremy.
I appreciate your time, I really do. Ian Parminter from the Australian National University.